Hello and welcome to another episode of All Politics is Local. I'm John Tian, your host. All Politics is Local is a production of the Greater Blackstone Valley Democrats. For more information about the Greater Blackstone Valley Dems, feel free to visit our website at www.gbvdems.org. We've got yet another great show planned for you tonight. With me in the studio are several representatives from Milford Cares, an organization that is opposed to the retail sale of marijuana in town. With the referendum coming up on September 19th, it's a great issue to talk about. So welcome, Milford Cares. We have Jose Costa, Donna Niro, Beverly Swymer, and Tony Chiarelli. So welcome, you guys, and thank you so much for being here. Let's dive right into the issues. Why don't we start with a little bit of a discussion of who is Milford Cares and what's your organization all about?
Well, let me start with John. Thank you for having us here tonight. We appreciate this opportunity. So Milford Cares is an offshoot of Citizens for Milford, and basically we are a small grassroots organization that has grown with a lot of support of local officials, subject matter experts, and concerned citizens. So we have a substantial group size now, and we have our mission is to uphold and protect the health, the safety, and the integrity of our family community.
Anybody else want to jump in? Do you guys have a mission statement that you'd like to discuss, or?
Well, I think it's important for us to recognize that we're not challenging the legality of recreational marijuana. We also fully support medical marijuana and its role in compassionate care. We respect anybody's personal liberties to grow, consume, or smoke marijuana according to the law as it's stated in Massachusetts. We are not, it is all about what we want for Milford in terms of safety, health, and integrity. We're not against anything.
Okay. Who are your members? Obviously the four of you, but you must have more members. Is there a wide membership in town?
There is a wide membership. As I said, it's comprised of we have the support of many of the local officials, the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Health, some members of the school committee. We also have the support of many concerned citizens. We have the support of Amy Leone, who is the owner of Community Impact, and she is a substance abuse professional and a counselor.
We also have the support of Milford Hospital. Ed Kelly, the president and CEO, has made a public statement in support of the Milford Cares initiative and a yes vote for September 19th. This is not deviating historically. In November, he also spoke in favor of against the marijuana vote. So he feels it's a health awareness issue, and that the hospital is a health institution, and its mission should be the health of the community. So we're delighted with his support, and Dr. Jeff Hopkins, director of the emergency room, will be one of our guest speakers at the forum on September 12th.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the referendum that took place in November. Let's just to discuss the law, just to get a little background on it. What can you tell me about what happened with the referendum?
So back in November, ballot question 4 was about the legalization and the commercialization of recreational marijuana in Massachusetts. And so that question is why we're here. The voters voted to legalize marijuana in Massachusetts. As part of that vote, and written in that legislation, it gives the communities and all of the communities in Massachusetts the opportunity to opt out of recreational commercialization of marijuana. So as a community, we are exercising that right to opt out. Now we know that at the time, if we look at all of the communities and towns, that the citizens in Milford actually, there was a discrepancy of like 500 votes. So, however, the language on that question was quite confusing. And it was an 8,500, just shy of that, an 8,500 worded question, intentionally created by the marijuana promoters, that, by the marijuana industry, intentionally created to confuse, and it did. So when it was decided that as a community we would take this to a referendum vote and exercise our right to vote, we're hoping that the language is more easily understood. It is still confusing because the way the question is written is, it starts off with, shall Milford opt out of, and it goes on into the specifics. So in order to prohibit recreational marijuana sales in Milford, one would have to vote yes. So a yes vote would prohibit recreational marijuana establishments in town. A no vote would allow the sales of recreational marijuana in Milford.
Okay.
And so that's still, it's still a point of confusion. So it's reaching out to voters. Number one, we want everyone to get out and vote and to have a clear understanding of what they're voting for.
Okay. And so there have been some changes to the law. The legislature made some changes to the law as it was written in the ballot question. Do you want to speak to those at all?
Well, one of the changes I know about is the change in tax revenue. And currently, the tax, I'll give you the breakdown of the revenue. So it's a 20% taxation rate, and 10.75% of that is for the state excise tax. 6.25% is the state sales tax. There is another optional 3% that the town can exercise. So that's a local excise tax. And the town can choose to set that tax anywhere from 0% to up to 3%. And that tax is tax that would be paid by the consumer at the point of sale. Additionally, there's also a 3% impact tax that would be negotiated with the establishment. And that, again, would be, as I said, negotiated, so that, again, could be anywhere from 0% up to 3%. And the purpose of that tax is to cover the expenses, or attempt to cover some of the expenses incurred by the impact that this will have on a community.
Okay, so kind of a mitigation.
Kind of a mitigation. So, what's very telling, though, is that the state is already admitting to the fact that we know that recreational establishments will have an adverse effect on communities. So I think that speaks volumes about what we could potentially be getting into.
Well, the other thing you said as well is when you said the 3%, isn't it true, though, that it's really going to be up to the selectmen to determine if you want to be at the 3%? It could be lower.
It could be lower. It could be anywhere from 0% to 3%. And what we know is the town of Franklin, they set their local excise tax at 2%. So with that being said, if this were to move forward in Milford, Milford may want to be competitive, and they may set ours at 2%. So what we're talking in terms of revenue is for every $1 million of sales. That would mean if it was set at the max at 3%, right, it would mean $30,000 worth of revenue. If it's set at the 2%, it's going to be $20,000 worth of revenue. So not a real, not a windfall.
It's not a cash cow.
It is not a cash cow.
And when you realize, when you talk impact on the community, what has to be taken into consideration in terms of law enforcement, health services, impacts on the school, $30,000 is not a lot of money. It does not go very far trying to address. Amid the incredible opioid crisis that we're struggling with now, as all communities are, it is really something that we have to consider in terms of impact and expense on the town.
And Donna mentioned she threw out Franklin as one of our communities that is moving forward with a retail sale. But on the other end of it, you have a lot of communities around us that have opted out. I think, as you can see, Donna and Bev are the ones that are really too hard here on this issue to know that Tony and I will be jumping in once in a while. But
Holliston, Westboro, Southboro, and Medway have banned it. Okay. Bellingham, Ashland, and Hopkinton have moratoriums. And under review is Hopedale and Upton. So it appears that a lot of towns are watching what we're going to do, which makes sense. If we have it, why would they bother? It's just a short ride.
Isn't the Franklin area similar to back when Mendon was going through with the strip clubs and things like that, and everybody had to get their zoning and their bylaws and everything in place so they were constitutional and whatnot? Didn't Franklin pick the area for things like strip clubs, tattoo parlors, and the same zone would fall for these stores, which is all up in the industrial area up by Forge Park or something? It's up in that area, so that it's not, their zoning is not in the town where the kids are. It's on the other side of 495, and there's no homes over there. Where our industrial zones, where the zoning has been put, we had to pick those spots. There are impact areas, and we're going to talk about that down the line. The impact is much different for Milford than it would be for Franklin as far as the way it goes. So it's not because, oh, Franklin's doing it, why are we not? It's generally, they've isolated it. Their impact, short of the medical impact, and and remember, the people from Franklin are coming to Milford Hospital. So the impact to Milford is they're impacting us by approving it in the first place, and then the other impact, like I said, is not the same because of where they're potentially going to put it.
And what people have to keep in mind is this whole law is moving ahead very, very quickly. And it's, as we've learned in recent months with the changes in the law, there's a lot of unanswered and unknowns to this law. And so do we want as a community to be the experiment of this law and find out what really works and what doesn't, what issues are going to be raised and what issues are we going to have to deal with? So if we were dealing with a fixed issue in terms of this is illegal, even law enforcement doesn't know how they're going to handle it. So there are a lot of unknowns in this situation, and I would hate our community to be the one that says, don't do that. Milford did it, and that's what happened.
Okay, so let's go right into those issues. I mean, you're saying there are a lot of issues. One thing that we discussed prior to coming into the studio here was geography. Milford is kind of at a crossroads, so let's talk a little bit about that as an issue.
Sure. I'll start with the zoning as it is currently is the IB and IC zones. That is areas where 495 exits, the two exits, are very accessible for anyone traveling to the Cape. They can pop in and pop out. There's also areas, an area where a pot shop could go in at the end of 109, 16. So we're very open in all the directions that 140, so 140, 16, 109, and the two exits of 495 is a pretty open door to this initiative and this sale of retail recreational marijuana. So it stands to reason. We're accessible. People from other states will be coming in because we're I don't know that they're going to travel up to Maine. So the comments that we've heard from people who have experienced Colorado is, hold on to your hat because they will be coming from all directions into Massachusetts.
Now, when you mentioned Maine, Maine has also legalized retail marijuana.
February 2018.
Okay, so
yes.
next February it becomes legal in Maine.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we're July 2018.
And other than Washington, D.C., Massachusetts and Maine will be the only two locations east of Colorado to have legalized recreational marijuana. So people will be swarming here to buy product, as Beverly said. And we are very accessible.
And that's the kind of information that is available from looking at states like Colorado.
Yes.
There's enough information data out there that shows of the transportation into other states, all the way even to Florida. So.
Okay, and so what other impacts do you think that we would have in town? Would there be impacts to real estate values, for instance?
Well, you know, there's a lot of voiced concern about that. That's one of the comments I hear most frequently in town after the effect on the children and our image of our town is like, what happens to our property values? And will someone come here looking for a house knowing we have X amount of pot shops? Will you be able to sell your home if there's a pot shop demographic in town? So those are concerns that are voiced, you know, we've been hearing over the last couple months. And of course, we have no idea, you know, we can't project that. But it is a concern. That feeds upon itself, though. You know, one person says, I don't know, I don't want it in town because I might lose property value. And another person says, well, that's why I'm going to move. So, you know, it's that kind of conversation that can trigger a very negative impact on the community.
So you'll hear us a lot talk about the Colorado experience, since Colorado is really the first, one of the first states that tested, is underway with this. I think they've been 3 to 4 years into it now. So really, as Bev pointed out earlier, one of the issues we have with all the unknowns is there's just not enough information out there about the little that we have from Colorado. I guess we have to be fair in this subject when you talk about real estate values. Is one of the things that I've learned from looking into this is that when you look at Colorado, for example, they actually went up overall as a state, the values. What they had an influx of people that moved in, especially due to the medical marijuana requirement that they wanted to get a hold of it. And as a result, you had a lot of people moving into the state, therefore it becomes supply and demand, and your values went up. But the important thing to pick out of this, though, in the real estate values, is if you look closely at the, you know, I was looking at Realtor.com, for example, and one of the points they pointed that they had in there, while the values have gone up there, if you look at the communities, the towns that actually have retail that have allowed the sale of marijuana within a half a mile radius, properties values have declined. So you can't look at it as the overall from a state. You have to look at it really from what we're talking about. What's happening to Milford. We're not, again, as we said it earlier, we're not opposed to people using marijuana in the state. It's been approved and so forth. We're talking more the retail sale of it here in our town, which would, as we see from Colorado, reduce property taxes in our town.
Property values.
Values, I'm sorry, yeah, not taxes.
We could only hope. And you know, Milford is already dealing with a bit of an image issue. And you know, Josh Leoch pointed this out, and he said, you know, there's a lot of concern that, again, to speak to Jose's point about, and Bev's point about property value diminishing. So I think it's something that is critical to consider and understand that, you know, as one of the major impacts on our town.
Okay. We started to talk a little bit about health impacts. Bev, you were talking about the health impacts and the hospital with Ed Kelly supporting Milford Cares. Why don't we go into that a little bit?
Sure. You know, I think the amount of information that is out there, published, fact-based, research-driven information that supports concrete impact on health, especially of our children and young adults, is overwhelming. I have been astounded with the amount of information that is out there, clearly pointing out the concern for brain development, for addiction, for if you want to call it a bridging drug or a gateway drug, there's volumes of information from people's personal experiences. You know, maybe the people personally who had suffered a bad experience with marijuana with their children who progressed to a more serious addiction. But there's science-driven information that we have the benefit of to learn so that we guide our children in a different direction and hopefully guide our community. That's what this is all about. Is I have learned a lot personally. I had no idea of the impact that marijuana had on brain development, on a child's ability to learn, and its long-term effect on someone's cardiac status, on its impact on mental illness, depression, schizophrenia. They're finding there's a very strong link between that and kids who started smoking marijuana very early. So, you know, we can turn our heads if we want to ignore that. But it's pretty hard to ignore if you have children or grandchildren, and really for our entire community.
Right, because we're adding another drug we're mainstreaming or normalizing another drug in our community potentially. And we are amidst an opioid crisis nationwide. So the question is, why would we want to add one more thing to that? Because we know that as something becomes more readily available, you know, there's that curiosity factor that builds. So if you know that, you know, if someone puts something out in front of you here, you know, you might not think that you want it until you see it, right? And then there's that, oh, I see that, now I want to have it.
Well, I was hoping you were going to bring cupcakes, because if you were to put some cupcakes in front of me right now, I might have one.
So let's talk about that.
Right.
Sure.
All right, so one of the big things is that the edibles and the drops in different ways, so that the recreational marijuana has levels of THC that are 10 times the potency of the marijuana that the hippies were smoking in the 60s and 70s, and the adults of today may have experienced on their own or whatever. So it's much more addictive and there's much more of an impact. But now the big thing is because of obviously the smell and the smoking and the impact on your lungs, so they developed the edibles. So now you've got candies and gummies that look just like the stuff that the kids get in the store. So it's there. How do you regulate that, or how do you monitor that in the schools? Kids have cupcakes, brownies, cookies, whatever it is they're going to bring to school. How do the school administrators or the police or anybody, how do you monitor that? How do you prevent that? You know, you can tell if a kid's smoking pot in the bathroom, or if they're drinking alcohol, or just, you know, there's just easier ways. And so there's so much to contemplate on how to handle that and how to deal with that. Like you said, why would you introduce that into our society, in our community right now? With everything else that we're dealing with, think about the way that, I've heard the argument from people that, well, I can go down to the liquor store and buy alcohol, and I can go down to the convenience store and I can buy cigarettes. Why I should be able to go into the same store and buy marijuana if I want to? Well, in today's world, if tobacco was introduced as a brand new thing, it would be outlawed because of the addictive nature of it. And potentially alcohol is the same way. You wouldn't have bar rooms and all of that going on. So things that were introduced and became normalized in our society, and even someone encouraged at one point, is we can't change that overnight. But think about it, we talked about this, if back in the 70s, drunk driving was almost like a game. You know, who's the best drunk driver? Because we're all drunk. Get in the car and you win, you're driving, and hopefully we don't hit anything. And today it's a stigma. You know, if you get an OUI, you're half a step away from a child molester. It's awful. And that's the impact that we've realized as a society that drinking has, not just the addictive nature and the health issues, but it's just, we've made it that way. So we've kind of corralled it as best we can, and as a society we'll continue to corral it. why would you introduce something else that we now have to try to corral or control? That doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever, especially where the kids are involved. I've been involved with youth sports my whole life, and I can't imagine with the message that we give to kids today about eating right and taking care of themselves and striving to be the best they can be, and this whole change that we've gotten to with athletics, to turn around and say, yeah, but it's okay to eat those things or take the risk that they're going to be exposed to it. That's all it takes is one overdose because the kid ate a whole brownie that had a full gummy potency mixed into it. I can't imagine. Why would you vote for something that would put a kid's life at risk? That it doesn't make any sense to me. I think that's really one of the biggest impacts for me is the potential impact on the kids.
Yeah, and to what Tony said, I mean, again, we know that the state's approved it. You know, we've approved it in the state, but allowing it to retail right here in our community, allowing that exposure, it's a lot easier to get for the kids in our community. So, I mean, if somebody really wants to get it, they can grow it at home or go, you know, they can drive to Framingham, drive to Franklin if they want, but, you know, but I don't believe that we should expose the people in our community, our young folks in our community to this.
You know, the recent changes in the law tightened up on the packaging of the edibles. Before they did that, it was you might see a package that said Pop-Tarts, and you might see one that said Pot-Tarts. You know, that's pretty, I might overlook that. So, but now they have tightened up on the packaging. However, the product remains the same in terms of, does the child know, once it's out of the package and they're all on the table, which one is safe and which one isn't? And I contend that this problem's not going to just stay on a social level, like we saw in Danvers with the prom and the kids got sick. There were 5 of them that got sick because they had some brownies. It can make its way onto the playing field. It can make its way into the classroom. It can make its way anywhere that it wouldn't be noticed and yet have an impact. Proms, dances, kids don't understand. To them, legal is safe.
So we also talked a little bit about driving while impaired, and there's certainly a lot to be said about the conundrum that we have there right now, in that there's really no safe or effective test to see if a driver is currently impaired. When you're using marijuana, it builds up in your bloodstream, so it's not like they can just check your blood. You could have had some marijuana 2 weeks ago. It would still be in your bloodstream. So what about driving while impaired? What are your thoughts there?
Well, driving while impaired is a big issue because, as you said, there is no reliable field sobriety test yet. It is something that they're working on to develop, but in the meantime, it's difficult to arrest and prosecute as a result because there is no standard to go by. So I do know that some of the police departments are being educated on being able to assess the behavioral aspects or the seemingly physical aspects of a driver who's driving impaired or under the influence of marijuana. But until that is worked out, until we have something that's in place that is reliable, then we are at greater risk. I mean, we're always going to be at risk, but it's difficult to have any consequences for driving while under the influence of marijuana. And I don't know if you read the paper the other day, but there was a driver who recently caused an automobile accident, and he had been driving. He had just said he had smoked a joint before he left the house.
So I mean, right, an article I have, and Bev touched on it earlier, there's enough information, especially from the government out there, that people can do research on to find out on issues like this. And one on this subject right now, I'm looking at the piece of paper in front of me, which is for the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and it's titled "What You Need to Know About Marijuana Use in Driving," and it just comes out and says, driving while impaired by any substance, including marijuana, is dangerous. All right, and I don't know if any of you had the opportunity to see about, I think it was in March or so of this year, but Fox 25, when the legislature was trying to decide on what to do with the bill and where they were going to go before the governor signed it. Fox 25 had they had 4 individuals that were occasional marijuana users at this point, medical marijuana and recreational, and they actually took them to a test site here in Massachusetts, and they ended up giving them marijuana to several levels. They test them out, and then they had the state police there and a medical person there as well, doctors, and they saw what their impact on driving. And even the person that really was used marijuana on a regular basis, that sometimes some people feel that you can handle more.
Right, you would think that he would have built up a tolerance.
To it.
Yep.
Even that person hit the cone, and out of those 4, in that when it showed it, one of them was a woman who actually crashed and said she would have had a major accident in that study. I mean, and that was was done by Fox 25 not that long ago.
Yeah.
I think that, with all the research that's being done and all the studies that you can't deny the effects, and at McLean Hospital in Belmont, a renowned institution, there's a woman by the name of Dr. Stacy Gruber who's doing research, actually doing clinical imaging while a person is smoking marijuana and watching the areas of the brain light up. And one of her findings is that the frontal cortex, the last part of the brain to really come online, is damaged by the marijuana, lights up brilliantly. And so, her concern is kids' brains don't really fully develop till early to mid-20s. So if they start smoking marijuana early in their teens, or even as a younger teen, the damage is of great concern. That part of the brain being involved in decision making, that kind of comes into play. And if it is damaged in a way that it doesn't rebound, that impacts their life, not just being a teenager.
Okay, so another thing that we talked about earlier before the show, accessibility and normalization. Who would like to jump in on that topic?
Well, I'd like to start with that. So, if something is more accessible, there's going to be an increased rate, an increased use rate. And so, and that's what happens. The more accessible a product is, whether it's a drug or anything else, that the use rate is going to go up. And by having it more accessible, it appears to be more mainstream, like it's welcomed into our society. And I don't think that that's really the image that we want to create. We have to remember that this drug, marijuana, is still a Schedule I substance and is not legal at the federal level. So, and the Surgeon General has all kinds of warnings listed for marijuana. So why do we want to promote this as being healthy? Because it isn't healthy. Now we recognize that in terms of the medical industry, that there are a lot of people who are relying on it for medical reasons. But for recreational purposes, why are we promoting something that we know has psychotropic effects, that we know has all of these adverse health effects, that definitely has, affects the development of the brain and the decision-making process, as Beverly said, and a whole host of other things? Why are we saying it's okay? And just because it's a plant-based product doesn't mean that it's safe. There are many other plant-based products, such as foxglove or poinsettias, that we have, all around us at different times of the year, and those are poisonous. So would we promote ingesting those and causing death? I think we really need to exercise caution and be savvy about what we're doing.
So Donna, pointed out again the accessibility, and that becomes again to me it's one of the important parts of this vote is that. If you look again at Colorado, the increase in youth and adults, the use of marijuana increased by 20% or more when it became legal there in the state. But I was not able to find specific data in the actual communities that had retail shops to see what the specific there. But you can expect if in Massachusetts, when you compare the population is not that far off from the Colorado population, I would expect that if that same numbers were the same here in Mass, if Milford had retail shops, it wouldn't be 20% because it's so accessible. You could be talking 30% or 40% because it's just that there. And I think that's, to me, that's the big issue. Why put it so accessible to the people that probably be most vulnerable, which to me it's youth and other groups that are vulnerable to using drugs today. So,
and part of the, we hear that convenience. I want to be able to. You touched on this earlier, John. I want to. People are saying, well, I just want to. I can buy my alcohol. I can buy my cigarettes. So, but you know what? Where do we go to the movies? The closest movie theater is in Bellingham. We drive out of town to go to the shopping malls, to go buy furniture, to go buy a whole host of other things. So why not drive out of town to buy marijuana? Why do we need to have it in our town and tarnish the image of Milford? I'm a Milfordian. I was born and raised here, and I come from a family of several generations of Milfordians. And so I'm highly invested in our community, along with many other people. And I just don't see it as a good thing for us. And I ask myself, what is the value? Is there any value to moving forward with this in our community? And I really cannot come up with any certain value, because the money doesn't do it, and and even if the money were to do it, it's at what expense? What are we giving up? What are the consequences that we're giving up? And I'd like to think, a lot of people come to Milford. We have a big draw, right? We have the Claflin Hill Symphony Orchestra. We have the Upper Charles River Bike Trail. We have the annual fireworks, where we do Field of Flags in Draper Park to recognize all the veterans and the active military. There are so many things that Milford has to offer that why do we want to start attracting a different crowd? Don't we want to attract people to Milford to enjoy the things that Milford has to offer, as opposed to dragging it down?
And let's, for people watching that, trying to figure out when you talk about the, Donna, when you mentioned the value component of it, the value of the dollars associated with it, the revenue, just to give people perspective of what that means, right? Mm-hmm. If that is a positive. If it depended on the number of shops that would be allowed to open in Milford, which is still an unknown today. Again, mm-hmm. The unknowns. Right. Is it 2? Is it 6? Nobody knows. Even when you ask officials, they're not even sure what that is. But let's say it is 2 or 3. I mean, if you are talking that they're bringing in revenues of $1 million each of those places, it could be like $3 million total for the town. For an individual, a taxpayer, that could mean like $3-4 a year on a tax bill. That's what we're talking about.
That's right.
And so I guess to Donna's point is, why would we, for that benefit, why would we go with all these unknowns that have been discussed, the youth issue, Tony pointed out, why would we do that to our community? And it's not like later on we can't, if we see we missed it, right. We missed it. It's not like we can't come, 5 years from now and say we want to opt in now.
Right.
We can. But why opt in now and then have to say we did damage to our community, I want out now, which is what's happening, I believe, with some of the Colorado
That's exactly
communities.
What's happening in Colorado.
So,
Exactly. Some of the ones in Colorado that opted in are now trying to get out because of the impacts that have happened, because it was such an unknown. So they've served as the laboratory, the guinea pig situation. The data is there.
Right.
So why, you can't ignore the facts. That's really what it comes down to.
So that's a nice segue, because that's our next topic. What have we learned from other states that have legalized marijuana?
Well, we've learned that in terms of safety, we know that in communities that host pot shops, the number of motor vehicle accidents increases exponentially, and the auto insurance costs also increase. We also know that, another argument is that decriminalizing or allowing, it's decriminalized, but commercialization will eliminate the black market, but that is another misconception, because the black market is alive and well in Colorado. And we have to think about the cost. An ounce of, nationally, an ounce of marijuana costs about, I want to say it's about $327 something. It's very expensive. So the black market, the black market thrives. And another thing that happens is that they use the law to break the law in Colorado. And so the illicit growers are taking the marijuana and they're illegally transporting it to other states where it isn't legal, and then they're selling it on the black market. And we can expect that the same would happen here.
So let me add to what Donna just said. I'm looking at a report here that actually has numbers related to, and again, we keep on using Colorado because that is the state that was one of the first to.
And it's been in, legal for a couple of years.
Other states have come in, but it's been too soon for the other states at this point. But to what Donna just said, marijuana traffic, related traffic deaths increased 48% in three-year average since the legalization of marijuana. The youth marijuana use, I mentioned earlier, increased 20% in the 2-year average since legalization, where nationally youth marijuana use declined 4% during the same time. Adult marijuana use, 17% increase. Emergency department marijuana and hospital marijuana-related admissions. Again, this is all Colorado right now. Visits per year related to marijuana. In 2011, prior 6,000 visits related to marijuana, and now 2014, 18,000. So you can just see the impact that would happen to Nick, and especially since it was Tony mentioned earlier, it's our hospital within the surrounding towns.
Right.
Marijuana-related exposure, 100% increase. I mean, the stats are out there that people can get this information, and it's just. Tony mentioned it earlier that go out there, research it. It's there. It's not easy. A quick Google search on some of this of the impacts to Colorado. You can find this, and most of the documents that I have here are actually government-related documents. So it's not one side trying to portray something. You can get the facts of what's taken place, especially traffic accidents and so forth. You can get that from the highway.
I think you have to be open to it. You have to be open to listening and learning and making an informed vote. Because I keep thinking about what kind of message it sends to our children and young adults as voters if we go out there and embrace this as a community, that we want retail recreational marijuana in our community. What does that tell our kids? That it's legal, so it's okay. So when you have a brownie that has marijuana, that's okay because it's legal. Kids watch their parents and watch adults very closely. And we teach by example. And I would hope we could teach our kids that you keep your body healthy and you are very careful about what you put into your body. And that legal doesn't mean it's safe and healthy.
Donna, you had some facts we talked about earlier about the differences in between the medical marijuana and the recreational marijuana, between the THC and I forget the initials for the other.
CBD.
Oh, the
The
CBDs.
CBD. Can you talk a little bit about that, because I think that's important to know. Where we say we're not against medical marijuana. And I don't think everybody out there knows the information. I didn't know until I learned from meeting with you guys. So I think it's important that people know the difference, because it's not the same product.
No.
Right. And I mean, in one respect, pot is pot, but there are several cannabinoids contained within the marijuana plant. And for medical purposes, the psychotropic agent, or the THC, is typically removed or is very low. However, the CBD is the cannabinoid that seems to have the most therapeutic effect for medical patients. And so there's a difference between someone going to a medical dispensary and getting their marijuana and someone walking into a recreational pot shop where the levels of THC are quite varied and are quite high. There's also a product that is called wax or shatter, and that's at least 90% THC, again, the psychotropic agent. So that's the mind-altering piece. And those are the products that those products are of great concern getting into the hands of adults and children. And those high THC level containing products in joint form, whether it's smoked or vaped or eaten in the form of edibles, are extremely potent. So for example, in the edibles that are typically about 30 to 40% THC, Beverly talked about the labeling on the packaging and how there will be disclosure, and a serving size will be listed, and the amount of THC in the product will be listed. However, once it's out there, once it's out on the table, you don't know what your serving size is. So for example, a gummy bear, and we all know how big a gummy bear is, right? So there's enough THC contained in one gummy bear to get 4 adults high. So in the hands of a child, that one gummy bear could potentially mean a very quick trip to the ER. A brownie is another example. A brownie typically contains about 6 servings. The same with a cookie is also similar. So when you pick up a brownie or a cookie, do you just take, do people just take one bite and put it down and say, I'm done?
Not me.
And so those are the things that that people need to be aware of, is how potent and what the after effects could be. And children, when we talked about the ability of these items to be easily passed around, children, adolescents, teenagers, they're taking these items, some unwittingly and some intentionally, to school, to sporting events, to the dances and proms, and passing them around because they fall under the radar, right? If they're sitting around in a group, and even if their parents are there, no one is aware that they're eating marijuana-laced brownies or cookies or chips or whatever it is that they're eating. So they're easily camouflaged, but the effects are very dangerous when it's not controlled.
Go ahead.
I think just to follow up on what Donna was saying, the other piece of it that people may not be aware of is, as an adult, you have a brownie, and you think, I'm gonna have the whole brownie. I don't just have a little piece of the brownie. And you wait, and nothing happens, because it takes an hour and a half or so, depending on your size and the amount, for you to start feeling some kind of high from it. So they're finding, some adults are getting into trouble because they eat more brownies. And so by the time they get to the hour and a half, they've imbibed in so much of it, they're very ill. Now, I have heard, can someone die from marijuana? I don't know that you can definitely say. There are some instances that you're hearing that marijuana has been listed as the cause of death on a death certificate. That is just starting to surface. But can marijuana cause you to do something that will cause you to die? Yes, it can. There are multiple situations that are reported,
Well, yeah, what's the joke? Hey, everybody, watch this.
Yeah, exactly.
Famous
Well,
last
just
words.
because they're tripping out on the THC, and it's so broad in terms of its reach. It's not just this little gummy bear. It's what can happen as a result of that. And adults are at risk too. And just because they're adults doesn't mean that they're not subject to becoming very ill from it.
And you make great points, especially if I look back at, I grew up in Milford as well, and I look back at the 70s and 80s, and I remember during that time, Milford was actually had a bad rap as well with drugs at that time, and we've done, our law enforcement has done a great job of getting us away from that, and that's part of when you talk about the image of you don't want to go back there. But I think when you look back at that time when I was growing up in high school and here at that time, you look back and people my age or around that time frame will say, well, at that time it wasn't bad people were doing and all that. But I think you just touched on some important things that people don't even aren't aware of.
No.
One is that the potency of it today compared to what it was at in the 70s and 80s is very different. Mm-hmm. Two, the gummy bears and all this other things that you've all been talking about, and you make a great point there, Beth, that when people smoke it, it goes right into your lungs and right into your bloodstream, right to your brain, right?
Yeah.
It's an immediate, you get the immediate hit. When you're eating it, it goes into your digestive system, so it takes a lot more time.
Yeah.
And that is a worry, again, to the youth of our community that unexperienced, they touch these things.
Absolutely.
So why, again, going back to it, why would we want to make it so accessible? I
Right.
know it's going to be here in the state, it's been passed, but why make it so accessible for the people in our community?
Right.
Right.
And kids have parents and adult role models for a reason, to teach them about this, that there are all kinds of things in life that can happen in an unpredictable fashion, an unexpected fashion. But for us as adults to embrace this is very troubling. And I just think the kids will just think it's not a bad thing. That's, marijuana is not a bad thing. So why is everybody so upset? That's what you're hearing. Like it's not bad. But the more reading you do, you're convinced how bad it is.
So we've got about 6 minutes left. We did want to touch on one more thing, kind of like a what's still unknown, but I'm unsure how we would know what the unknowns are. But somebody should make a closing argument, or perhaps all four of you would like to contribute into a closing argument as we close out the show.
Oh, look at Donna or Bev.
Well, I just want to reiterate that we don't want Milford's legacy to be known as the epicenter of drug use, drug availability. We've lived through that already, as Jose mentioned, in the 60s and 70s. And at the time we were known nationwide as being the third largest community in the country with drug use. Let's not return to that. Let's let our legacy, let's be known for the things that Milford is, the things that are notable. For example, Milford's Pink Granite, or the Symphony, as I said. Let's keep our image. Let's maintain that image. Let's keep our kids safe. Let's ensure that we have greater safety in our community. In terms of, I don't think one of the points we didn't touch on yet was maybe a little bit on the black market, but how that affects. There are a lot of cash transactions, right? Because this isn't federally legal. So at the federal level, the F in the FDIC is not applicable. And granted, there may be banks that come online or credit unions that come online in the future, but right now that doesn't exist. So with transactions being primarily conducted in cash, that has led to increased crime in the form of robberies of both cash and product. So I guess when we know that we're going to have such a strong impact or adverse impact on our community, let's not sign up for that. Not now, maybe, as Jose said, maybe in 5 years from now, but let's see what the consequences are going to be, and let's let's stay as we are before we introduce something else.
And I just would like to re-emphasize that our efforts are all for health, for safety, for the integrity of our community. We're not fighting, we're for. And the thing that is really important is we absolutely support medical marijuana and its role in compassionate care. And we respect everybody's personal liberties to grow, consume, eat according to the law in Massachusetts. We are not against that. We just don't want retail marijuana recreational shops in our town.
Okay. We still have a couple of minutes left.
Well, you know, I'd like to put in, we're hosting a community forum on September 12th at the Town Hall at 7 p.m. And we encourage as many people as possible to attend. So we are going to have a great lineup of speakers. Senator Viriato de Macedo will be there. We have Brian Murray speaking. We have all three selectmen who will be there speaking. Joe Marias will be there from the school committee. So we have a great lineup.
Dr. Jeff Hopkins from the emergency room?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yep. So it's a great lineup of speakers,
Okay.
and there'll be a time for question and answers as well.
One thing that Jose touched on before was going out online to get information about this. Do you guys have a web presence? Do you have a Facebook page or anything along those lines where people can get in touch or learn a little more?
Yes, so we do have a Facebook page, a Milford Cares Facebook page. We also have a website at milfordcares.com. And the website is
Under Citizens for Milford.
it's under Citizens from Milford, and then the second tab is Milford Cares, excuse me.
And of note on that, as all the impact statements that different notable people in town gave us to be able to express their support of our effort and their concern for the community. It's really very validating and encouraging to have that kind of support. And I think, you know, leaders in the community can really impact people's perception in terms of, is this good for our community or should we bypass it? And I think we're really lucky to have this number of people come forward and support us.
Okay. Jose, Donna, Beverly, Tony, thank you all so much for being here. I got to tell you, this is my most crowded show yet. I haven't had a show with 4 guests.
Oh, wow.
This is a first.
Always a first, John.
Can I make
So
one more
you've-
plug, John?
You've been watching All Politics is Local. All Politics is Local is a production of the Greater Blackstone Valley Democrats. For more information about the Greater Blackstone Valley Dems, feel free to visit our website at www.gbvdems.org. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Good night.